So, thanks everyone. Bob, we finally got me out to a Mars Society conference. How about that? I think I was at least one of the ones that were in DC over the years. So Bob and I go way back, as you might imagine. We both have the scars to prove it. For those of you who don't know me, I've been working in the policy and issues and politics of space for 33 years. I was, a long time ago, a glorified intern for Newt Gingrich, and then a junior staffer, and had the opportunity to go work in the Reagan White House and work for Dr. Gerard O'Neill, and got a master's degree in space studies, and went back to Capitol Hill and worked for 5 years for Dana Rohrabacher and Chairman Bob Walker and Chairman Jim Sensenbrenner of the House Science Committee and Space Subcommittee. And then for the last 13 years, I've basically been consulting for the commercial space industry in one way or another. And I'm also, as Bob knows, I'm a co-founder of the organization that he once described as pound for pound the most effective space organization in the country, the Space Frontier Foundation. That's because, like the amoeba, we're a very small organization, but we're, ferocious in our outlook about commercial space and the human settlement of space. You got it up? It's just PowerPoint. Oh, it's not. Ah, sorry. I should have brought my laptop up. Sorry. So I am one of those evil lobbyist people you hear about. I know you always wanted to see one. Here I am. I do have to take showers more often. Not because I generate slime, but I work with people who generate slime, and therefore I have to, essentially every so often take care of myself and make sure that I'm not, how are we doing? That's mine, right? Oh, yeah, that's mine. So, by the way, because I am a lobbyist person, I am not a record-setting American hero astronaut. If you were expecting to see Michael Lopez Alegria here today, I'm very sorry he couldn't be here. I am his substitute. We'll see if that works again, based on how today goes. I've had the privilege of working for the Commercial Spaceflight Federation since it was founded back in 2005, and Michael is our president. He has been in addition to being a true American hero and record-setting spacewalker and ISS crew member, et cetera, he's also an incredibly passionate advocate for human space and the role that the U.S. private sector and the commercial industry and the entrepreneurial industry can play in that. So my goal here today is to offer you some of my thoughts on how the commercial sector will help make it possible to go to do Mars sooner and faster, and I will try not to take any thunder away from my friends and sometimes clients at Inspiration Mars who are coming up next, who are the real people you want to hear. So let's just go on through here. So it is not sufficient, if we can get that. It's here on the screen. Sorry. Yeah, really. All right, I'm just going to go on without the benefit of external slides and just talk. Let me talk about what I believe, okay? I, like Bob and like most of you, I am a, there we go, yay. I'm just going to ask you to trust me and that I'm a passionate advocate of a limitless human future in space across the space frontier, because I wouldn't have done what I've done over the last 30-some years, often without much pay, if I weren't, okay? So, and I will tell you that I am really, really tired of fights among the advocates of specific destinations, okay? You know, I believe in what I call an all-of-the-above strategy. I'm sorry that this administration couldn't explain the flexible path, that it was supposed to be about all the above, that you were supposed to be able to get to go everywhere as you could afford to go. It's unfortunate they couldn't do that. It's unfortunate that some people within NASA as well as elsewhere didn't like the idea of going back to the moon, but it's also unfortunate that they didn't really talk about how you would get all the way to Mars. I do not support pure government-only flags and footprints missions, because if we walked away from the moon 40 years ago, we can walk away from Mars, assuming we even get there. Okay, and I don't want that to happen. I want it to be unstoppable. And what we really need to do is open and pave and create way too much traffic on several alternative highways to Mars, because our goal should be suburban sprawl on Mars. Okay? I realize that's probably not a good term to use in this community, given their environmental ethos, but you know, what the hell, I'm going to go there. I'm going to suggest that all of you should insist on something from anybody who wants to sell you something. Anyone who has a project or an organization or anything, you know, you should force them to show you how it actually gets to the goal you want to achieve, the real strategic goal. So the term from the civil rights struggle was keep your eyes on the prize. You know, we've been to this party where NASA or NASA contractors or well-meaning politicians or anyone, you know, and no one did this in a bad way, okay, maliciously or with any evil or any bad intent, but to keep the program alive, you know, we sold the shuttle with some promises that, of course, were not real, and we sold the space station that way. You know, going back in the space community, I was on the board of the L5 Society back in the early 1980s, okay? And the L5 Society threw its heart and soul into getting Space Station Freedom started and keeping it alive in the early years when NASA was just saying, just give us some money, we'll just get started. And L5 said, no, we want to actually get there. And they kept fighting and fighting and fighting, and the goals that L5 had for the space station to really make it a doorway to exploration, a doorway to settlement, a doorway to industrialization, all went away. And then lower cost alternatives or augmentations of it were killed off. So, and then of course, a lot of you, the reason I'm not going to be able to stay with you here today is I'm headed down to the DCX 20th anniversary reunion in New Mexico that's going on today and tomorrow, and I'm speaking there tomorrow. And of course, the DCX turned into the X-33, which, you know, no disrespect for the great people inside Lockheed Martin that worked on X-33, but we didn't get there. Okay, and of course, Constellation got canceled. Right, wrong, I'm not arguing about whether it was good or not. I'm just saying things go off track. Things don't get where they're supposed to go. And so what you need to be sure is that there is really a connection between whatever anyone is offering you and where you really want to go, what you really want to have happen. So how is commercial space relevant? After all, it's just suborbital tourism, right? Okay. Or just even worse, uncrewed lunar lander things. Lunar landers. Oh my God, that's not relevant. Well, here's how it's relevant. Just this week, JPL announced a press release that they are testing on Maston's Zombie vehicle, which was their first generation vehicle that flew on the Lunar Lander Challenge Level 1, their new advanced precision landing software for going to Mars. Okay? So you have a commercially developed vehicle that's affordable to fly, affordable to test, has good performance, and can challenge the software to actually run through all the parameters and run through all the sorts of issues you want to run through on the Earth instead of while you're descending to Mars. Okay? That's a picture of a nozzle, a very lightweight nozzle test that X-Corps did for ULA for an upper stage engine that ULA wants X-Corps to build. That would be, oh, I don't know, a fifth the cost of an RL-10, but have the similar performance using X-Corps' piston pump technology, which is what they use on the Lynx suborbital vehicle. So the same technology, first of all, the very same LOX pump, okay, would work for a LOX hydrogen engine, and they are amazed. I work for X-Corps, I've worked for them for a long time. They really, really, really didn't want to touch hydrogen. ULA really had to make them go touch hydrogen. And it turns out it works. Amazingly. So we could see suborbital rocket engines turn into upper stage engines, and given that the current SLS upper stage concept, I mean, the first one is a Delta IV heavy upper stage, but that's the ICPS that's going to fly on the first two SLS flights, but there's various concepts for upper stages beyond that, but most of them currently use RL-10s, okay? RL-10s are $25, $30, $35 million. If you make them cheaper and you're using multiple of them in a stage, especially a cryogenic propulsion stage that sends you all the way to the moon or an asteroid or Mars, if you can make them cheaper, that's good. If you can demonstrate that they're reliable because they've fired on the ground, that's great. Now, I'm not saying that commercial crew and commercial cargo to ISS is relevant to Mars exploration simply because it makes ISS affordable. It actually makes ISS usable. We could increase the crew size of ISS from 6 to 7, or perhaps even more, once we have a commercial crew capability at ISS. NASA currently estimates, on average, 35 to 40 hours of productive utilization time from the 3 crew slots that the US and our European partners own. The Russians own the other 3. It turns out that if you add another person, there is essentially no fixed cost increase to do overhead in ISS operations, which means you just doubled the amount of research time you're getting out of ISS. Since this is about humans in space actually doing research and testing out new technologies. And there are plenty of technologies, whether they're ECLSS systems for Inspiration Mars, or new propulsion technologies, or propellant transfer techniques, or other things that we could be doing in ISS, and of course, radiation, some radiation tests you can start doing in space at ISS. We need to use ISS as a platform for figuring out, it's not that we're going to use it necessarily as a staging base for going to Mars, but we can bloody well use it to learn everything we need to learn to go there. And the faster and cheaper we can do that, because we have more access to it. Imagine an Antarctic research station if we could only go once a year. One ship and one overland caravan going to the South Pole and then back, as opposed to regular flights of Air National Guard and boats and ships and other private aircraft and all sorts of other things. Now, I am not here as someone who does work for SpaceX, okay? I am not here to say that the commercial space industry is going to solve Martian exploration for us. Okay? I am not saying that. Now, it's a very intriguing idea. That as you build up the launch infrastructure and the spacecraft infrastructure, you can start to actually talk about fairly low additive cost missions where you've tested out all sorts of new techniques for Dragon, and you've got Falcon Heavy performing, and maybe you're upgrading the engines, maybe you move to a bigger system. My point is, that would be a great way for us to be able to go to Mars in quantity. And that is absolutely Elon's personal vision. He wanted to have an existence proof. He wanted to show that it was possible and to have at least one way of going. He has enough confidence in himself to think it's the best way, okay? Like all genius entrepreneurs. But our vision, your vision, deserves more than one path dependent on one firm. What we need, I would argue, is a commercial human exploration ecosystem of multiple companies with multiple capabilities so that innovative mission planners like Dennis can think, oh, how do I put these things together to go do this mission? How do I put these capabilities together and then all NASA has to fund is one additional capability that increases or improves something, rather than designing the perfect system for the ultimate Mars exploration architecture. Use what we have. Use what we can have in the fairly near term. Use incremental increases. Intel Corporation did not start with the core processors. I used to say Intel didn't start with the Pentium 4, but that was a long time ago. Okay? They started with a large-scale integration chip to do data, basically passing data for line printers. Anyone remember what that term means? Most of you have no idea what I'm talking about. Okay? And, let me see some hands when I run off some names of companies. Cromemco, Zilog, Processor Technology, Sinclair. Now, I bet all of you have heard of Apple. Apple's the only company from the personal computer revolution in the late 1970s that survived. The only one. All those other companies existed and went out of business. But they were all developing competing ideas, competing approaches, and lots of people who worked in those companies or invested in those companies or developed new technologies for those companies went on to work at IBM or Compaq or Dell or Apple. That's what I mean by an ecosystem. That's what we need for commercial human spaceflight and commercial human space exploration. Now, let's talk about the real program where we are spending billions of dollars right now, as we should, so that America can go explore Mars. Humans to Mars requires more than a monster rocket, just to quote Senator Nelson, okay, and more than a large crewed spacecraft. I have absolute confidence that NASA can and will make SLS work, and that Lockheed can make Orion work, okay? I'm actually a little bit upset that Orion's getting slowed down by bringing the Europeans in, but, you do what you do. But what about commercial-enabled NASA exploration? What about if you took some because there wasn't a lander in there, right? So what if you, used a Bigelow habitat that you're demonstrating at ISS with the beam experiment and used that as an inflatable habitat for a mission? Well, that's an obvious case where a commercial asset can help you go do a NASA mission sooner. What about landers? Those are hard. I remember going to the Altair Industry Day that JSC held during Constellation back in 2006, I think, announcing their first, that this was the plan. And they said, the program manager got up and said, everyone knows that the lunar lander, the LEM, was the most expensive piece of hardware in the Apollo program. So it's going to be a big deal. This is a big program. So you big contractors, you bring your IRAD dollars, you bring your profit dollars, and you invest some so that you can win this big contract. And that's fine. But do we have to wait for a lander? The Augustine Committee showed that, if you are developing a lander at the same time as you're developing a launch vehicle and a spacecraft, you hit the budget limits, okay? You can't add all the programs up on top of each other. It doesn't work. You have to develop the launch vehicle and the spacecraft, maybe together, maybe a little bit in series, and then you go do the lander afterwards, okay? Well, what happens, what if you could take a cryogenic propulsion stage that you have to develop for as your Earth departure stage, and you turned that into a lander? ULA, if you go Google dual thrust access lander, you will find some innovative papers written by folks at ULA for taking a propulsion stage, okay, a LOX hydrogen RL-10 engine at one end, and use that main engine for the high thrust deceleration from lunar orbit or Mars orbit down to the surface. And then it rotates over, much like the DCX, and lands like the landers from Space 1999, laterally, on its stomach. So, for the last few years, Maston, which has developed and proven out not just propulsion systems for vertical takeoff and landing, but for attitude control, for avionics, et cetera, has been working with ULA and some folks inside NASA Marshall and NASA JSC on that idea as an enhanced, all of Maston's vehicles start with an X, okay? So X enhanced upper stage. And that's the concept. You've got propulsion along the stomach. It's slowed down to, X 100 feet, 1,000 feet, 5,000 feet above the lunar surface. But instead of kicking all the dust up with the main engine, you go down and have a soft landing that doesn't generate a lot of debris. And that front end is your habitat. The point being, you use the same tooling that makes your cryogenic propulsion Earth departure stage to make your lander. They're just modifications. Small little add-on kit engines. Small little few thousand-pound rocket engines along the stomach. Probably plumbed to the same tanks, at least to the LOX, but probably to both. And then you've got a cargo module or a habitat or something. Now, once you start processing methane and LOX on the surface of Mars, or LOX and maybe hydrogen on the surface of the moon, you've got a way to get back up too. The point is, if you come up with innovative, common, you share infrastructure, share costs, so that it's more affordable. You've got to come up with innovative way of doing things. Suddenly you can start having some interesting ideas. Okay? It turns out that if you use that sort of approach to go to Mars, you get two benefits. One is, because you're having a dual thrust system, instead of having a big oblate Mars lander, you could actually put, I don't know, high L over D structure around, lifting structure around it, around your tankage for landing, a heavier weight on the surface. But for sure, you can take one SLS launch and launch a CPS and a drop tank, and then launch your lander with Orion. The drop tank fuels up the CPS and the lander, which is called Ceres, for, ex-Zeus, but going to Mars, okay? And there's 2 LS flights putting humans on Mars. I'm not endorsing this. My point is that because there is a commercial space revolution going on, you've got innovative capabilities, cheaper RL-10 class engines, new avionics boxes, new potential landing architectures that are sharing cost and infrastructure with the commercial industry and commercial customers. And for sustainability, SLS plus propellant depots means that if we're only able to fly SLS every 2 or 3 or 4 years, depending on budget estimates and costs and things like that, what if SLS could launch Orion and the CPS, or even meet a CPS already up there, and fuel up and go, so that the big and heavy things that are required, that we need SLS-4 to go to Mars, are complemented by whatever the cheapest way of getting propellant up there is. But then one SLS flight becomes one Mars mission. And that makes Mars more sustainable. That makes it more cheaper to keep going and go again and again. If it gets cheaper over time, not because of scale of magnitude, but because you're bringing in newer, low-cost ways to do part of the mission. You're innovating. Different parts of the mission architecture are being essentially outsourced and privatized and done in a cheaper, more innovative way. And if what we want is lots of human beings on Mars, you have to find ways to have the same sorts of cost innovation and improvement in aerospace that we've seen in the computer industry for the last 4 decades. This is just a chart that Michael uses to talk about the virtuous cycle of, you get more launches, you start to drop marginal launch costs, you spread out fixed costs, you get more innovation, you start to reduce the price per flight. Eventually that stimulates more demand or new applications that you didn't think of before, and then we need a virtuous cycle. We've had the opposite in space transportation for the last 20 years, where it kept getting more expensive to go into space. So we did less. We came up with fewer things to do, which made costs even higher. And there was absolutely no payoff for innovation in launch, because why would you try to save money on launch? Because you only had so many launches a year anyways, and each payload was costing billions of dollars. So why innovate? My message to you, I guess, is that commercial is happening anyways. I'm not here to tell you that you need to support commercial so that commercial will deliver Mars to you. That is not my message to you today. My message to you today is commercial is happening anyways. Commercial is a friend to human exploration of Mars. Commercial is a friend to NASA exploration of the solar system. And in fact, may be a necessary ally and supporter to make it happen, and make it happen sooner and cheaper and better, to actually achieve the dreams you all have. And hopefully we can stop this insane fighting between different rockets and different destinations and all that stuff, because we're not going to get there if we just shoot each other. So thank you very much for your attention, and I'll be glad to answer any questions.
Okay, right here.
Yes, well, almost more of a comment. I've looked at it. The Falcon Heavy Dragon Rider combination could do the full lunar mission if it could be refueled on the surface of the moon and in lunar orbit. But I like the lander you're suggesting better, especially if we could make it so that it's reusable and you just bring fluid.
Let's have them compete.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
That's the American way.
Sure.
Okay, right here.
Yeah, just a quick question. I'm curious, here I am. I'm just curious whether there's been any thought, to your knowledge, to salvaging the ISS. Its mission is coming to a close. Heavy lift is coming
Don't say
on
that.
board.
Don't say that. It's going to be extended to 2028.
so
it's going to
my
be extended to
question-
2028.
my question
This mission is
is-
not coming to a close.
Excuse me, my question is,
Sorry.
has any serious thought been given to salvaging parts of it as elements
I believe that's what the L2 Gateway was about.
as elements of a Mars cycler along the lines of
I'm sure Buzz has thought about it.
yeah,
sure other
I'm
people
asking
thought
from
of-
your
I don't-
point of view in Washington, has it been given
Oh.
serious thought?
There may be people inside NASA in Washington or inside companies with offices in Washington about that.
Okay,
But
thank you.
that is not something that Congress tends to think about or NASA leadership tends to think about. It's not a bad thing. It's just they're focusing on the big picture, not on the detailed technical architectural options. So, hi, please.
I mean, it seems to me that the way you stop infighting in any program is you don't have decreasing budget. You have enough budget for expansion. I mean, the question really is, why is the NASA budget as slim and idiotic as it is? Because the return that NASA gave us is incredible. And the investment
will
is
tell
nothing.
Jeff Bingham you
How
have asked
do
the
we
Memorial
get the
Jeff Bingham
budget? How do
question.
we convince the Bill Gateses of the world with his IV Ventures that going to Mars has a bigger return for humanity than anything Mr. Gates is doing?
Well, one of the good things about our country is that if you don't agree, you don't have to put your money into something. So, I don't agree with Mr. Gates. I thought his comment was somewhat, frankly, sort of ego-driven in terms of like, oh, these other stupid Silicon Valley billionaires, they're wasting their money blowing things up, basically. Okay. And what's wrong with that? Okay. I do not know. I want to try to answer this question because it's a real question. I'm sure I've already said things I shouldn't have said today, but I'm definitely going to say something I shouldn't say now. Just in case anyone's wondering. As wonderful and heroic and historic and incredibly important as the space program has been to America over the last 50-some years, okay? We all know it is not what it could be. You have a chicken or egg. You cannot get congressmen to vote to cut funding for Medicare spending that has been promised to senior citizens or to future retirees who are now in their 50s like me. Okay? Okay, thank you. Unless you can show them the payoff. You can't just argue about it. You can't just say it's there. You can't just wave a magic wand and say it's good for the country because they don't believe us. All right? So it would be nice if we could just increase NASA's budget. Okay? The reality is that NASA's budget, like every other domestic discretionary agency, is getting cut in the throat. It is not getting cut more than other agencies. In some ways, it's getting cut less. Okay? But that's the reality. So you either have NASA stop doing things that it's doing now, or close infrastructure based in important congressmen or senators' districts, okay? Or make a credible argument that there is a reason to take money away from other programs and give it to NASA, okay? Now, my approach is to say, if you bring the commercial sector to bear with NASA, then NASA's money goes further. and you use what's already happening in the private sector with these crazy billionaires spending their own money to leverage NASA's money and get us there faster and further. And by getting us there faster and further, we will demonstrate reality. We will demonstrate that we are making a difference, as opposed to people thinking that because the shuttle turns off, the human spaceflight program is over, which was ridiculous. Okay? So your question is the essential question. Why doesn't NASA get more money? Okay? And what I'm going to tell you is, I don't think this NASA, okay, and the recent past will get more money under any foreseeable now, some of my friends in Washington say, well, if you don't ask for it, you won't get it. Okay, fine. Ask for it. But I'm not seeing the money show up. I'm a passionate member of Congress from Huntsville, Alabama, who was a member of the Science Committee, screamed and bloody murder that SLS can't proceed with without at least $1.8 billion a year, and they're only getting $1.4 billion a year, or $1.5 billion a year. Okay? What do you do? Okay? Now, for the purposes of this discussion, let's assume that you continue SLS, that that's the way we're going to do exploration. Okay? Then we've got to find a way to add to it, to augment it, to leverage it, to turn one SLS flight into multiple missions or more missions than you would otherwise, to not have 11 Ares 5 class missions for the DRM-5 that NASA had for Mars missions several years ago, in which the guys at KSC were telling me there is no way to process that many Ares 5s through the VAB and do it. You can't do it. It's not possible. Because it was built for liquid rockets. It wasn't built for large numbers of solids at the same time. So, because the explosive power of having multiple 5-segment stacks in the VAB at the same time is a bad day. So, so we don't know how to do it. We literally did not know how they were going to process that many Ares 5s. Now, the chief engineer that came up with that analysis that said it would take 11 missions, he was looking at it from the rocket science point of view. But ultimately, it has to get down to the Joe six-pack, blue-collar, guy turning a wrench to make it happen. And what I'm saying is that the same innovative practices that you see at Maston and XCOR and Paragon and a whole bunch of other companies can be brought to bear to help NASA. I mean, look at the Morpheus lander that JSC has. Armadillo Aerospace built that for JSC. Okay? The Mighty Eagle at Marshall was built largely with help from the former lunar lander, the former Google Lunar X Prize team at Marshall, including Tim Pickens, okay? That's now part of Moon Express. So there's all sorts of ways for us to work together and come up with innovative partnerships and do innovative things. I'm going to get off the stage and let some people who are... Okay.
All of the important revolutions of history have started with a small core group of people. That technical achievement behind it is what humanity needs to do next to have the next quantum revolution. Just for humanity's self-respect. I'm glad to see some students in this room, but there is the core group of mind and effort within this room to get on the internet and make this happen.
And we're about to hear from people who have got something that you can, and the young people can go participate in. So I'm going to say goodbye and let Bob come back up.